I've found someone younger, and I'm leaving you, Daniel announced smugly at our daughter's graduation reception, his voice carrying across the elegant hotel dining room. The words hung in the air like poison, and I watched as nearby parents turned to stare. Sophia's valedictorian ceremony had just ended an hour ago, and here was my husband of 26 years, choosing this moment to destroy our family in front of everyone we knew. My name is Cecilia Martinez. I'm 51 years old, and I work as a marketing director at Lumerin Publishing here in Denver, Colorado. For years, I had endured Daniel's increasingly cruel treatment, his late nights, his unexplained absences, and his obvious affairs. But tonight, as I stood in my elegant navy dress watching him smirk with satisfaction, I felt nothing but calm determination. "Actually, Daniel," I said, setting down my champagne glass with steady hands, "that's perfect timing. I have an announcement of my own." My voice was clear and confident, cutting through the murmur of shocked conversations around us. "I'm also leaving you. For someone younger, actually. Much younger." Daniel's smug expression faltered for just a moment, before returning with vengeance. "Don't be ridiculous, Cecilia. Who would want a woman your age? You're delusional if you think you can do better than me." I smiled serenely, the way I had learned to do during all those board meetings where men underestimated me. "His name is Mike Peterson. Perhaps you know him? Tall, brilliant, charming. Your boss?" The color drained from Daniel's face so quickly I thought he might faint. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, and the confidence that had radiated from him just moments before evaporated completely. Around us, the reception had grown quiet, and I could feel dozens of eyes watching this drama unfold. "That's impossible," Daniel whispered, but I could see the fear creeping into his eyes. He knew it wasn't impossible. He knew exactly who Mike Peterson was, and more importantly, he knew what Mike Peterson could do to his career with a single phone call. Sophia appeared at my side then, slipping her arm through mine in a gesture of solidarity that made my heart swell with pride. My daughter was 22, brilliant, and had inherited none of her father's cruelty. She had watched him hurt me for years, and tonight she was ready to watch me finally fight back. "Dad," Sophia said quietly, her voice steady despite the tremor I could hear underneath. "Mom deserves better than how you've treated her. We all know about your affairs. It's time for her to be happy." The room was completely silent now, waiting to see what would happen next. I looked at Daniel's pale, shocked face and felt the first stirring of satisfaction I had experienced in years. The path that led me to this moment had been building for years, though I hadn't realized it at the time. Daniel and I had met in college, both ambitious marketing students with dreams of changing the world. He was charming and confident, and I was drawn to his certainty about everything. We married young, had Sophia 2 years later, and settled into what I thought was a good life in Denver. But somewhere along the way, Daniel's confidence had curdled into arrogance, and his ambition had turned into cruelty. He began treating me like an accessory to his success rather than a partner in our marriage. When I got promoted to marketing director at Lumerin Publishing 3 years ago, instead of celebrating with me, he made snide comments about how I was getting above myself and forgetting my place. The affairs started around then, or at least that's when I first noticed them. Late nights at the office that smelled like perfume, mysterious phone calls that ended when I walked into the room, credit card charges at restaurants I had never been to. I confronted him once, and he laughed in my face, telling me I was paranoid and jealous. Sophia knew, of course. Children always know more than their parents think they do. She had caught him on the phone with his secretary multiple times, had seen the way he treated me with contempt when he thought no one was watching. Last year, when she came home from college for Christmas, she sat me down and told me I deserved better. "Mom, you're brilliant and beautiful and kind," she had said, tears in her eyes. "You don't have to stay with someone who doesn't value you. I'm old enough now to handle whatever you decide." That conversation had planted a seed that grew slowly over the following months, I began paying more attention to my appearance, not for Daniel, but for myself. I started taking evening classes in French, something I had always wanted to do. I began to remember who I was before I became Daniel's wife and Sophia's mother. That's how I met Mike Peterson. He came to give a guest lecture at my French class about international business communication. Mike was 35, the youngest vice president in the history of Velthorn Global, Daniel's company. He was also Daniel's direct supervisor, though Daniel rarely mentioned that Mike was the one actually running their division. Mike was everything Daniel wasn't. Respectful, intelligent, genuinely interested in what I had to say. When he asked me to coffee after class, I said yes without hesitation. When he told me I was the most fascinating woman he had ever met, I believed him because he looked at me like I mattered. The relationship that developed between us over the following months was built on mutual respect and genuine affection. Something I had forgotten was possible. The moment I truly realized how toxic my marriage had become was 6 months ago, when Daniel humiliated me at his company's annual dinner. I had worked for weeks on a presentation about cross-cultural marketing strategies, something Lumerin Publishing had asked me to develop for their international expansion. I was excited to share my ideas with other professionals in the industry. But when I stood up to speak, Daniel interrupted me with a loud laugh. "I'm sorry, everyone. My wife sometimes forgets she's not actually qualified to talk about international business. She works for a small publishing house, not a real corporation." The room fell silent, and I felt heat flood my cheeks. But instead of backing down, I looked directly at Mike Peterson, who was sitting at the head table with the other executives. His jaw was tight with anger, and when our eyes met, he gave me an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. "Actually," I said, my voice steady despite the humiliation burning in my chest, "Lumerin Publishing just secured a $15 million contract with European distributors using the exact strategies I was about to discuss. But perhaps this isn't the right audience for that level of detail." I sat down to polite applause, but the damage was done. Daniel had shown everyone exactly how little he respected me, and I had finally seen him clearly for the small, cruel man he really was. Mike approached me during the cocktail hour afterward. "I'm sorry about what happened in there," he said quietly. "Your husband was completely out of line." "He usually is," I replied, surprised by my own honesty. "Would you consider having dinner with me sometime? I'd love to hear more about your marketing strategies, and I'd like to discuss a potential opportunity with you." That dinner changed everything. Mike told me about Velthorn Global's plans to expand their European operations and how they needed someone with my exact skill set to head their new Paris office. He also told me he found me brilliant, beautiful, and inspiring, words I hadn't heard from a man in years. "I know your situation is complicated," he said as we walked to my car that night. "But I want you to know that you have options, both professionally and personally." The professional opportunity was real and substantial. A position as European Director of Marketing, with a salary that was nearly double what I made at Lumerin. The personal opportunity was more complex but equally appealing. A chance to be with someone who valued me for who I was, not who they wanted me to be. Over the following months, as Mike and I grew closer, I began to understand what a healthy relationship looked like. He never spoke to me with contempt, never dismissed my ideas, never made me feel small or foolish. When I told him about Daniel's affairs, he didn't tell me I was imagining things or being dramatic. He simply held me and told me I deserved so much better. The plan we developed together was elegant in its simplicity. Let Daniel dig his own grave, then bury him in it. The weeks leading up to Sophia's graduation were a careful balancing act. Daniel had no idea that his boss was courting his wife, both professionally and personally. Mike and I were discreet, meeting for coffee in neighborhoods across town, taking long walks in parks where Daniel would never think to look for me. But our relationship was deepening every day. "I've never felt this way about anyone," Mike told me one evening as we sat by the lake watching the sunset. Age is just a number, Cecilia. What matters is how we connect, how we understand each other. He was right. Despite the 16-year age difference, Mike and I had a connection I had never experienced with Daniel, even in our early years. We talked about books, about travel, about our dreams for the future. He listened when I spoke about my work, offered insights that helped me see problems from new angles, celebrated my successes without jealousy or condescension. Meanwhile, Daniel was becoming increasingly reckless in his behavior. His affair with his 25-year-old secretary, Jennifer, was now an open secret at Velthorn Global. They took long lunches together, stayed late at the office, and Daniel had even been seen kissing her in the parking garage. Mike, as his supervisor, was keeping detailed records of every inappropriate incident. "I won't lie to you," Mike said during one of our evening walks. "Daniel's behavior is creating problems for the entire department. His work quality has declined. He's missing important meetings, and the other employees are losing respect for him. I'm going to have to address it soon." But we both knew the real confrontation would come at Sophia's graduation. Daniel had been dropping hints for weeks about major changes coming to our family. He was planning something dramatic, and we were ready for him. Sophia was in on our plan, of course. My brilliant daughter had figured out that her mother was happier than she had been in years, and when I finally told her about Mike, she was delighted. "Mom, you're glowing," she said during one of our lunch dates. "I haven't seen you smile like this since I was little. Whoever this man is, he's good for you." When I told her it was Mike Peterson, her father's boss, her eyes lit up with mischievous delight. "Oh, this is perfect. Dad has been bragging for months about how important he is at Velthorn, but he never mentions that Mike Peterson is the one actually running everything. He's going to lose his mind." The graduation ceremony itself was beautiful. Sophia gave a spectacular valedictorian speech about having the courage to pursue your dreams and not settling for less than you deserve. I caught Mike's eye in the audience and saw him smile. He knew, as I did, that Sophia's words were meant for me as much as for her graduating class. At the reception afterward, Daniel was in his element, playing the proud father and successful businessman. He had no idea that his world was about to crumble. I watched him work the room, introducing himself to other parents with pompous confidence, bragging about his position at Velthorn Global. "My husband is quite the performer," I murmured to Mike when he approached our table. "Not for much longer," Mike replied quietly, his hand briefly touching mine under the table. "Are you ready for this?" I looked across the room at Daniel, who was laughing too loudly at his own jokes, while Jennifer hung on his arm like an expensive accessory. I thought about all the years of humiliation, all the times he had made me feel small and worthless, all the nights I had cried myself to sleep wondering what I had done wrong. "I've been ready for this for years," I told Mike. "Let's end this charade." Daniel chose his moment carefully, waiting until most of the other families had finished their dinners and were mingling around the reception hall. He stood up with theatrical flair, tapping his wine glass to get everyone's attention. I recognized the look on his face, the satisfied smirk of a man who believed he was about to deliver a devastating blow. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying across the room with practiced confidence, "I have an announcement to make on this special day." Sophia shot me a worried look, but I squeezed her hand reassuringly. We had prepared for this moment. Mike, sitting at a nearby table with some of the other executives, looked calm and ready. 26 years ago, I married my college sweetheart," Daniel continued, gesturing toward me with false sentimentality. "We've had a good run, raised a wonderful daughter, but sometimes in life, you have to make difficult choices." The room was quiet now, sensing drama. I could see other parents shifting uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether they should be witnessing this moment. "I've found someone who makes me feel young again," Daniel said, his voice gaining confidence. "Someone who appreciates me for who I am and what I've accomplished. Someone who doesn't spend her time criticizing me or trying to compete with me professionally." I almost laughed at that last comment. Daniel had always been threatened by my success, unable to handle the fact that his wife might be as capable as he was. Jennifer, standing beside him like a trophy, beamed with the confidence of a woman who believed she had won some kind of prize. So tonight, I'm announcing that I'm leaving my wife for someone younger, someone who understands what a successful man needs in a partner. The gasp that went through the room was audible. Several people looked at me with pity, expecting to see a broken woman humiliated in front of her peers. Instead, they saw me stand up slowly, smoothing my dress, a serene smile playing at the corners of my mouth. "How interesting," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "I have an announcement of my own." Daniel's confident expression flickered for just a moment. He hadn't expected me to respond, had probably thought I would run from the room in tears, or beg him to reconsider. But I had spent months preparing for this moment, and I was finally ready to claim my power. "You're absolutely right, Daniel. 26 years is a long time to spend with someone who doesn't appreciate you. Someone who treats you with contempt, who belittles your accomplishments, who thinks so little of you that he flaunts his affairs without even trying to hide them." A murmur went through the crowd. This wasn't going the way Daniel had planned. "So I'm also leaving," I continued, taking a step closer to him. "For someone younger, much younger actually, someone who values intelligence over arrogance, kindness over cruelty, someone who sees me as an equal partner rather than a convenient accessory." Daniel's face was beginning to change color, the confident smirk fading into something closer to panic. "Don't be ridiculous, Cecilia. You're 51 years old. What man would want—" "Mike Peterson," I said clearly, cutting him off. "Perhaps you know him. Tall, brilliant, charming. He's your boss, Daniel, your direct supervisor at Velthorn Global." The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel's mouth fell open, and I watched as the implications hit him like a physical blow. Jennifer looked confused, clearly not understanding the significance of what I had just revealed. "That's impossible," Daniel whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. He knew Mike Peterson. He knew exactly how powerful Mike was at Velthorn Global, and more importantly, he knew what this meant for his career. "Not impossible," I said gently. "Just surprising. To you." The explosion, when it came, was spectacular. Daniel's face went from pale to bright red in the span of seconds, and when he finally found his voice, it came out as a roar of rage and disbelief. "You're lying!" he shouted, loud enough to make several people jump. "There's no way Mike Peterson would want anything to do with a woman like you. You're nobody. You work for a tiny publishing company." "Actually," came a calm voice from across the room, "Cecilia works for one of our most valued partner companies." All heads turned toward Mike Peterson as he stood up from his table, tall and confident in his perfectly tailored suit. He moved through the crowd with easy grace, his presence commanding attention in a way that Daniel's theatrical outburst never could. "Lumirin Publishing," Mike continued as he reached our table, "just secured a major international contract that will bring $15 million in new business to our European operations. Cecilia developed the entire marketing strategy that made that deal possible." He stopped beside me, not touching me, but close enough that his support was unmistakable. "She's also accepted my offer to head our new Paris office as European Director of Marketing. We'll be relocating there next month." The room erupted in whispers and murmurs. Parents who moments before had been watching a family drama were now witnessing what was clearly a professional power play, as well as a personal one. Daniel looked like he was going to have a stroke. His face was purple now, and veins were standing out on his forehead. "This is insane. You can't do this to me. I work for you." "You work for Velthorn Global," Mike corrected politely, "and your performance reviews have been concerning for quite some time. Your supervisor, that would be me, has documented numerous instances of unprofessional behavior, declining work quality, and inappropriate conduct with subordinate employees." He glanced meaningfully at Jennifer, who was beginning to look less confident and more worried. In fact, Mike continued, I was planning to discuss your future with the company after the graduation festivities concluded. But since you've chosen to make this a public matter, perhaps we should address it now. You can't fire me, Daniel sputtered. I've been with the company for 12 years. I have seniority. Seniority doesn't protect employees who violate company policies regarding workplace relationships and professional conduct, Mike replied coolly. Particularly when those violations create liability issues for the corporation. Sophia, who had been watching this exchange with wide eyes, suddenly stood up and moved to my other side. Dad, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the room. Everyone knows about your affairs. Everyone knows how you've treated Mom. Did you really think you could humiliate her like this and face no consequences? The support from my daughter was the final piece of strength I needed. I looked around the room at all the faces watching us, some shocked, some sympathetic, some clearly entertained by the drama, and felt a surge of confidence I hadn't experienced in years. Daniel, I said, my voice calm and clear, you've spent years making me feel small and worthless. You've told me I'm too old, too boring, too ordinary to deserve better treatment. But you were wrong. Mike sees me as I really am, intelligent, capable, and worthy of love and respect. I paused, looking directly into his shocked eyes. Tomorrow morning, Mike and I will begin planning our move to Paris. You, on the other hand, will be cleaning out your office and looking for a new job. I hope Jennifer is prepared to support you, because your days of riding on your wife's patience and your boss's tolerance are officially over. The satisfaction I felt watching Daniel's world crumble around him was sweeter than any revenge I could have imagined. The aftermath of my announcement rippled through the reception like an earthquake. Daniel stood frozen in the center of the room, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to process what had just happened. The confident, arrogant man who had tried to humiliate me minutes earlier was gone, replaced by someone who looked lost and desperate. This isn't over, he finally managed to say, but his voice cracked on the words. You can't just destroy my life like this. I didn't destroy your life, Daniel, I replied calmly. You did that yourself, with years of cruelty and infidelity. I'm simply choosing to stop enabling it. Jennifer, who had been standing beside Daniel like a decorative ornament, was beginning to understand the magnitude of what was happening. Wait, she said, her voice high and panicked. You're losing your job? But you said you were important at the company. You said you made 6 figures. I do make 6 figures, Daniel snapped at her. This is just some kind of misunderstanding. Mike, we can work this out. You're making a mistake. But Mike wasn't even looking at him anymore. He was looking at me with an expression of such warmth and admiration that it made my heart flutter. Cecilia, he said quietly, would you like to dance? I think we have something to celebrate. The band was still playing, and other couples were dancing, but as Mike led me onto the floor, I could feel every eye in the room watching us. I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt beautiful, valued, and free. You were magnificent, Mike murmured in my ear as we swayed to the music. I've never seen anything as satisfying as watching that pompous fool realize his world was falling apart. Behind us, I could hear Daniel's voice rising in panic as he tried to convince Jennifer that this was all a temporary setback. As Mike and I danced, the full weight of what had just happened began to sink in. Not just for me, but for everyone watching. Daniel's carefully constructed image of success and authority had crumbled in front of his daughter's entire graduating class and their families. The man who had tried to humiliate me was now standing alone while his wife danced with his boss, the woman he had dismissed as worthless, now clearly the victor in this very public confrontation. Sophia approached us on the dance floor, tears of pride in her eyes. Mom, she said, I'm so proud of you. You were incredible. "Thank you, sweetheart," I replied, pulling her into our embrace. "I'm sorry you had to witness that ugliness, but I couldn't let him hurt me anymore." "I'm glad you fought back," Sophia said fiercely. "He deserved everything he got and more." Across the room, I could see Daniel in heated conversation with several other Velthorn Global employees who had attended the graduation. His gestures were becoming increasingly frantic as he tried to convince them that he was the victim of some elaborate conspiracy. But these were people who had worked with both Daniel and Mike for years. They knew which man commanded respect and which one was just a middle manager with an inflated ego. Jennifer was looking increasingly uncomfortable as the reality of Daniel's situation became clear. She pulled out her phone and began typing furiously, probably texting friends about this unexpected development. A woman who had thought she was trading up for a successful older man was discovering that her prize was actually a soon-to-be unemployed man with no prospects and a destroyed reputation. The sweet taste of vindication filled my mouth as I watched Daniel's desperate attempts to salvage something from the wreckage of his evening. He had wanted to make me suffer publicly, but instead, he had destroyed himself while elevating me to heights he could never reach. Daniel's downfall was swift and comprehensive. Within a week of Sophia's graduation, he was escorted from the Velthorn Global offices with a security guard, his employment terminated for violation of company policies regarding workplace conduct and professional behavior. The young secretary Jennifer, who had been so confident about her future with a successful older man, disappeared from his life the moment she realized he was unemployed and facing financial ruin. His reputation in Denver's business community was destroyed, and he struggled to find work that paid even half of his former salary. The divorce proceedings were brutal for him, as I had documentation of his affairs, and our prenuptial agreement protected my assets. He was forced to sell his expensive car and move into a small apartment, a broken man who had gambled everything on his ability to control and diminish me. Mike and I moved to Paris 3 months later, where I threw myself into my new role as European Director of Marketing with passion and success. The city embraced us as a couple, and I discovered that love in your 50s could be even more fulfilling than young romance, because it was built on genuine understanding and mutual respect. Looking back on that night at Sophia's graduation, I realized that Daniel's cruelty had inadvertently given me the greatest gift of my life, the motivation to finally claim the happiness and respect I deserved, and the satisfaction of watching a bully face the consequences of his own actions.